Welcome back to another episode of the Magic Minds podcast. Today's guest, it's kind of funny to call him that because he is a close friend of mine. For nearly 3 decades, we have been good friends, and it's been fun to watch this person go from Little League football to a Navy SEAL, a 3X founder of a nonprofit focused on therapy and rehabilitation for veterans. And we cover all of these different topics. In addition, I actually get to spend time talking with an ancient friend about childhood memories of each other when we first met, the dynamics, the social dynamics of our neighborhood and our group of friends in a way that I think I even touch on in the episode, that it's rare to have this depth of a conversation with a friend. And it's unfortunate that it's so rare, but I feel so fortunate that I got to spend this time with my good friend Bradley Hicks today. He is a venture investor, like I said, a founder 3 times over, and we talk about his experiences being a founder, his experiences being a father, being a Navy SEAL for a decade, in 5 different deployments into conflict, and so much more in this wide-ranging, amazing episode with my friend. So without further delay, let's get into it. This is the Magic Minds podcast. All right, let's kick it off, right?
Let's do it.
Bradley, what's up, buddy?
James.
Welcome.
So delicious. I remember the early beta version in
2019.
I thought you had it before. I got it.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I guess a powder version, maybe 2018.
I had a powder in a bottle that I'd had water to. So
Yeah,
I got
it
that
was
beta.
2018.
Yeah. So this flavor is immensely better.
So good. And I always get nervous on the podcast when I take it, or at least I'm in my head. There's like 5 different things going on. Watching out for the mic, the just unscrewing it, making sure we hit, let's go. We're rolling. That it a little bit went down the wrong pipe. But we will persevere.
Yeah.
In fact, that'll be a fun theme within this conversation. And I actually want to start it with, so for listeners, Bradley and I have been friends for over 30 years. And what's so amazing and a bit discomforting and disorienting is you can be friends with someone for so long, and yet I'm sitting down for this conversation with you, and I feel like this is all going to be new territory. It's almost like everybody listening, start a podcast or just record a conversation with a good friend to create that intentional space, because it's so looking forward to our conversation and also dumbfounded by how you can be friends with someone for so long and not have created that space to have an in-depth conversation.
But we're here right now. We're doing it right now. So
we got it. We're luckiest friends out there because we get to do this. So I wanted to start one with that. I also wanted to ask, what's going through your mind right now?
I was just being present with the fact that we've known each other for 31 years. And I was literally, as you're saying that, I was kind of picturing you at that last age, or maybe the first age we met, which was 3rd grade.
Yeah,
or
3rd grade,
grade.
fourth grade
maybe
football.
Like 10, so maybe
28 years.
Yeah. And just soaking in the environment around me, as we were talking about earlier, like just looking at the Magic Mind label and looking at what you've built and what you and William have built together and the whole team, but like seeing it from conception to where it is now and watching your journey along the way, even though we never had the container like to drop in. I guess I'll take a moment to say I'm in awe of kind of your journey and where you are right now and what you've done and where you've been.
Well,
and that was all kind of going through my mind as you were introducing the conversation. So,
well, please, for speaking for every one of our friends, this is such a treat because we're all, and listeners, you're just going to have to excuse the fawning between friends that have a lot of love for each other, because we're all in awe, and listeners, you'll get to see why here in a bit, but in awe of your journey and everything that you have done, risen to, the challenges you've risen to, the opportunities you've chosen over others. This is going to be if nothing else, a selfishly really fun conversation to get to talk with you about these things that we just kind of, I don't know, skim the surface of so much of within a friendship. So with that out of the way, because it is so interesting for friends, so many people that I have on the podcast, we're meeting for the first time, and it's about their work. And this one gets to be pretty special, where it's just two friends talking. I don't know how interesting it'll be for listeners, but for me, like I said, this is maybe the most fascinating podcast conversation I've sat down to have, because of that reflection, I guess, leading into it of, man, so much of what I know of what I'd say is, quote unquote, a good friend is still so surface. And I really, the way I want to start the episode, outside of those maybe, I don't know, top of the order items, is how would you introduce yourself? This conversation in a podcast, because I could do a job, but it would be pretty surface level. I'm interested in how you'd introduce yourself.
Well, I'm a recent dad, so first and foremost, I'm a father.
Awesome.
It's the best thing ever.
It is.
Yeah, so it's my favorite job I've ever had.
Amen.
Yeah, so I am Hawk's dad. I'm Rachel's husband, so doing the journey together has been beautiful. I'm also an entrepreneur. I'm kind of co-building 3 different companies from essentially scratch. Float Lab, we're having to really redesign from scratch, and then 2 other companies were 2 years in, 3 years in, and they're starting to gain real traction.
Awesome.
I still do venture investment. So, I don't know, anywhere from like 3 to 6 deals every 6 months, I think. I have a foundation that brings healing to active duty SEALs, combat veterans, first responders, and their families as well.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, through Brandon, who you've met,
Right.
and Venice. Yeah. So.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. And we actually just landed, or we're about to land our first kind of big contract. So it's exciting. Cool. And yeah, so I'm just kind of finding that balance between all those things. And I'm also a veteran. So I spent a little over 10 years in the SEAL teams. And so kind of, navigating the process of finding purpose after that, in some ways is still going on, every day. But I feel today more than yesterday, and today more than last week, and today more than last year, that I'm like in my deepest groove I've known yet. In that journey of, purpose discovery, and, the role as a man to kind of be the protector and provider, but also to be building and designing and doing. And so I feel like right now
Do you feel like that is a role that is just wired into you, and just that selection of words of as a man?
Protector, provider, doer. Yeah, I think so. Well, I think it's for the most part kind of the masculine role is to protect and provide for the feminine. And that doesn't necessarily be man, woman. It can be whatever you want to call it. But generally speaking, it is, between those two. Yeah. And then I think you can do those things most effectively when you're really like in your dharma. And you've really found that purpose that you wake up excited for, so that you can be present in what you're doing, and also who you're protecting and why, and who you're providing for and why. So I would say I'm super grateful to at least know what that means, as close to the edge as possible as I've ever known right now, more than I did in the past. So
yeah, for listeners, what's going through my mind knowing Bradley is to hear you say, knowing that, being at the edge of that more now as a civilian than a Navy SEAL on deployment.
Yeah.
In conflict areas. So
that's a good point, actually, because I was happiest during my time in the Navy. I was happiest on deployment. Life just got really simple. You just worked, and you kind of played a little bit, and then you slept. But the mission was generally is very clear. And all of the other things in life that can add complexity, whether it be bills or, conflict with a partner or girlfriend or whatever, just kind of feeling
uncertainty
stuck.
in a job, or
Yeah, something happens in employment where this deep primal energy kind of coalesces around you and the guys, in my experience in the team. So that's where, have you read Sebastian Jung's book, Tribe?
No, but I've heard.
It's fantastic.
I've heard quite a bit about it. Yeah. Do you mind giving listeners a little bit of a synopsis?
Yeah, he's an anthropologist. So he's a deep understanding of human behavior and the ontology of all behaviors, contextualized with geography and history and all the things that shape kind of why certain humans are the way they are from certain areas at certain times. He was embedded with I think an army unit in Afghanistan, like in the thick of really kind of high risk kinetic conflict. And he even had some guys in the team he was with get killed, like near him. Like, so he was like in it. But the book is just about, a lot of people, you think about these things, we kind of romanticize what going to combat might be like, but what's not really talked about is what is happening in your nervous system, what's going on in your limbic system, what imprints are being made in your brain and your nervous system and limbic system to then have to be stuck with the rest of your life. And then how do you navigate those impressions and those imprints and the ways that they can obstruct your ability to live a happy, productive life. So he goes deep into.
This is a recent book, right? Maybe.
No, it's. Oh. I read it 10 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
But not like a 50-year-old book. This is.
No, it's recent.
Like,
I think he's still alive. He's a super revered author. I think he's probably one of the most revered living anthropologist authors alive. Cool. Okay, stronger. Yeah. It's not only about like the warfighter and like the psyche kind of behaviors of a warfighter. It goes deep into just like. One data point he uses that's really fascinating is that during the Blitzkrieg raid on London that the Nazis started in 41 or 2, the suicide rate in London the year before was like, I don't know, like 1% or 0.5% of the population, whatever that number is, I don't remember. Mm-hmm. The moment the Blitzkrieg started, there were no suicides for like a year and a half. They all the Londonites or Londoners, or what's the word?
Yeah, Londoners, I don't know. Yeah.
They all just became a tribe.
Purpose-driven.
They supported each other and they checked on each other. And, also just that deep primal instinct to survive kicks in, right? So that's where...
It's so interesting you mentioned London, because I was just thinking in one of my philosophy teachers, Joseph, shout out to Joseph, one of the things that he listened maybe a year ago, he's on his drive from Texas to California.
I love that he listens to you.
Oh yeah, he's it's actually
Hi,
really,
Joseph.
Hey Joseph, it is a kind compliment that he listens to these episodes, and he always provides little thoughts and things. And one of the things that he was talking about, and I can't remember what the context was, but I remember him saying on the drive from Texas to California, one of his drives to LA, because he's from Texas as well as you and I are, and he was saying he was listening to Prince Harry's book, and he's like, man, that guy, the only time he narrates his own book, it's like the only time you felt like he was really speaking from a place of truth and not like framing things, and also from a place of peace and energy, was when he was a soldier. And he was like, that guy needed to be a soldier. He needs to be a soldier. That's what he's wired for.
Yeah.
And that's something that you would not hear in modern kind of cultural zeitgeist of like people being wired to be a soldier. Certainly in your circles, but not in the, I remember working at Airbnb in Silicon Valley, and there was like a memo sent out of don't use military metaphors. Like it was that allergic to anything to do with conflict. And there was this time when it was like 3 or 4 years of like, we need to make sure that we're creating a safe space. And my executive coach, who's as woo as it gets within the Bay Area, he was like, no, that's terrible. There's no such thing as a safe space when you're trying to build something from scratch. Yep. And people need to be resilient and strong. We don't need to work on padding all of the walls when, as the founder, you know that you might not have walls in 6 months unless everybody is realistic about how difficult the work is. So it was just so interesting that that Joseph, a philosopher, full-time philosopher, is talking about, and it ties into, I think we've chatted about the Bhagavad Gita before, where the whole concept is this warrior prince trying to get out of this battle, and the whole 30-minute conversation between him and his charioteer saying, no, you have to fight this battle. So that's so interesting. One, you mentioned that peace and deployment, when I think most of us civilians would think it'd be the opposite. It's like, no, you on the plane home, or when you land home in San Diego, you'd be at peace.
Yeah.
Versus that reality, much less the mention of London, and reminding me of Prince Harry, or at least the commentary of Prince Harry's book.
I mean, if you were to send me right now, maybe I wouldn't feel the same peace and comfort being there. But I think, at that time where I was kind of in that groove, in that culture, that very much was who I was. And, it was easy to kind of find resonance within, that mission set after I've been in that culture. But then when you step out of it, like, I don't think anyone's wired to be, of course, okay, there's two truths here. Men can be wired to be warriors, true. But men are also wired underneath that, all around it, through it, to choose love too. To choose love and not to choose violence. But, men are capable of doing the latter. And I think that's important as a safeguard for how civilization kind of operates. But ideally you have a man that is capable of violence, who has found the frequency of love and found a way to kind of embody that. Personally, kind of where I've kind of found myself in my journey right now, I probably would not be able to go like find the same like excitement that I used to have in employment. So yeah.
Well, that piece is, you're the second Navy SEAL that I've interviewed and had a chance to talk with, especially as a founder and a Navy SEAL. The founder of TRX was on the podcast before it was the Magic Minds podcast, before when it was just a startup podcast, and
below the line.
Exactly. Yeah. Before the Magic Mind team was like, hey, can we make it a Magic Mind podcast? And he came on the podcast and said something that I want to touch on with you on the here and now and the entrepreneurial side of things a little bit later, because I want to excavate this mind that is your introduction, how you'd introduce yourself, because I know there's so much more there. Predates Little League football. But it was interesting that he said, this was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I asked him what gives you this, might be laughable because you're a SEAL, so forgive me if this is super ignorant, but what produces more peak stress on a continuous basis, being a founder or being a SEAL? And I'm almost thinking like this is laughable to even ask this of someone that's been to, in conflict. And he said so quickly, and your experience might be totally different, so not to prime your answer because I want to ask it in maybe 15, 20 minutes from now, or maybe right now. But he just said, he goes, oh, being a founder.
Yeah.
Being a SEAL, he's like, the bullets would whiz by my head and we'd be laughing because we were so well trained for that. On a Tuesday, there might be 7 things that I have absolutely no training for that happen, and in a really touching and unnerving way, he said, when you're a SEAL, if someone leads you off course, they lead you back on course. The people to your left and right, you're in it together. You got 65 years of history, 12 layers above you, 12 layers below you, all doing this together. And as a founder, as an entrepreneur, someone might lead you 20 miles in the wrong sales direction and say, hey guys, I'm really proud of the work we've done, but I'm leaving for this job at LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, what?
Yeah. Or
5 different things happen on a Tuesday that you have absolutely no training for, much less 12 layers above you looking over you, or 65 years of history. So actually, maybe I will ask right now, how would those compare if you were given that question without the priming of what he said of peak stress moments of building, being a founder, entrepreneur in that seat versus a SEAL?
I would generally agree with what he said, but I'd also preface it with personally, I am better at understanding when I'm becoming elevated. I'm getting like a physiological stressful response. So I'm more self-aware when that happens now than I was before. So I feel like I am much more cognizant of my stress levels rising, and then I have access to the tools to regulate those. I know how to I knew how to kind of do box breath drills then, but I really know how to kind of breathe through things now and like find regulation tools through, quick meditation or breathing or, certain kind of active, you can call them prayers.
What are some of those things that you do?
And
as much detail as you'd be willing to give, because I think people listening to this would love to hear those.
So I have an amazing teacher who started introducing me to Sufism, and it's just kind of it's like all the mystics, they all see the truth in everything, and whether your word is God or the quantum field or spirit or nature or quantum physics, whatever you want to call it, like whatever can help you shift into your heart neurons, to literally feel your heart and remind yourself that is part of that quantum entanglement, is our own heart energy, our own heart neurons. And literally stress is all up here. And finding some of the prayers, for instance, are words that carry vast meaning that I say out loud that remind me of the bigger picture, of the bigger field outside of my own field up here, but the one that starts here and connects to yours and all of the kind of unseen. And that helps me really reduce stress on the spot within 2 seconds. So
keep going. What other things do you do? And on that one, would 16-year-old Bradley even ever imagine that would be something that you'd turn to?
No, definitely not. I was super skeptical. I was an atheist from, 13 till 33. And then actually 13 till 35 probably. And then, kind of like what C.S. Lewis discovered in certain ways, in the process of kind of healing and discovery of self and kind of transcendence of self and discovery of everything, the unseen. That's kind of the process that I think we're all trying to go through, whether we realize it or not. Some people are very actively going through it and very advanced, and others are just waiting, and they might not get it in this lifetime. Maybe it comes later. But anyways, breath is everything, right? If you can control your breath, you can control your nervous system. And if you control your nervous system, your mind can kind of slow down and think more clearly. But I think I knew how to do those things in the teams. But it's a different context of stress. I think now, when you have, I have an investor for the first time, right? I have an amazing capital partner for one of my projects, who I just don't want to let down. And he's been so generous and wise and thoughtful. And I know I'll have more for the other two, because I've kind of personally funded the other two, but now I've got someone else's capital. So like that's a layer of stress that, founders know, that you are a fiduciary. You're stewarding someone else's capital, and you know that
you've
better
invested
than anyone
in things
else.
Where I've lost your money before.
But I would still, and I still keep investing.
And that is something that people, I think a lot of first-time founders would find so befuddling, that if you do things with high integrity, even if you fail, the right investors are like, oh, wow, you just got a PhD. I might as well.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I back you again? But that seemed so foreign to me.
I'd rather invest in a founder who's failed than one that, Elon's an exception.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple like him are exceptions, but generally speaking, you learn a lot when you fail, right? We have a nanny here right now that we met in Ibiza this summer that came to live with us in California. And she's 22 and just super wise for her age. We were talking about, she was kind of stuck in the sadness of some struggle she went through with her thesis for her university, and she didn't get the grade she wanted. And we were talking about, if you can get out of that terrible feeling that exists when you're stuck in the shame or frustration or anger, it's really hard to get out of it. I still struggle to get out of it every single day, but when you can get out of that and see the greater lesson and kind of heed to that lesson and really change, find the way to change, find that juice of the lesson and change your orientation of reality. Look at your patterns and behaviors that led to that failure, pay a close, humble attention to them, and then change. And anyways, she we were talking about that, and she's 22 and totally grasped it. Like I would have had no idea how to do that. It's one thing to be able to talk about seeing it. It's totally different to try to actually change. And I'm doing that right now on my personal front with my wife right now. Like I discovered a pattern that I'd never faced before, and it had affected her, greatly. And it blew up in spectacular fashion. And it's caused me to do some of the hardest work I've ever known, to work through all the layers of narrative that justify this sort of like psyche. And that's hard.
Well, I wouldn't be doing my job for the listeners or my job as a friend to not ask if you would you mind sharing some of the details of that pattern, or how it manifested itself and how you recognized it, and also just what led to being blind to it?
Well, the details will be.
We can splice this in. You can not answer this question. You can answer, but
I would love to answer to you, because I'm part of my process is to humbly share it, but not on a podcast.
Okay, yeah. You can just mention vague details, and then also know that anything that you answer an hour later, you can even listen to the whole thing afterwards. I'll make sure that you can listen to the whole thing and take anything out that you want.
Thank you.
Afterwards.
I would just say vaguely, our subconsciouses are, tens of billions of memories stored deep in your limbic brain, right, as you know. And that makes up your subconscious algorithm. And the older you live, the longer you act from those subconscious memories and those patterns, the more automatic they become. The more automatic they become, the more you think that is your reality. That is the reality. And if no one ever really gives you feedback, or if you don't have some sort of process to deconstruct the subconscious and understand what created those behavior patterns, if you never get those, then you'll live your whole life acting out these patterns and calling it fate. And I was fortunate enough to go through something in the fall called the Hoffman Process that taught me a couple of these patterns that I didn't even really know existed. I knew they existed, but I never faced them. I didn't really face them.
And you've done a lot of work on yourself.
Yeah. And it was just wild how I was able to just defend my way.
Do you mind telling listeners about the Hoffman Process? I know a little bit about it, but it seems to come up more and more these days.
Yeah. I think it's the most powerful school of transformation that exists right now, in my opinion. I'm sure there's ashrams and monasteries and places where you can go for years and decades or months and sit in caves and learn ancient teachings, but this is 1 week. So as far as being effective with time in today's kind of era, I think it's the most effective course there is, in my opinion. But essentially, what they do is it's a total deconstruction of self. It's a way to gain as much awareness as possible, which is probably, per individual basis, to understand what makes you you. What makes your subconscious program what it is. Environmental factors as a child, the people in your lives as a child, how you began to orient yourself and see yourself. And they have a really impressive and proprietary way to help you see those forces and those characteristics, and then to kind of make peace with them. And then you start getting revelations about all this stuff that you've done wrong, and you start feeling all you're able to see your behavior and your patterns and realize, all the hurtful things that they've done or the great things they've done, but you start to gain awareness of it, and it's kind of disorienting, and they help you kind of find your center again. And then they kind of teach you to navigate your reality with that new awareness of those patterns. And that sounds super vague, and I really can't say much more than that, but it's a really comprehensive protocol to deconstruct self, ego, to kind of forensically look at each part of what makes you you, and then to ideally give you the agency to choose if you want to let go of some of those things about you that you don't want to keep. And then they have the whole, enduring kind of integration protocol where there's an app and there's books, and
it's a 7-day program?
7 days. 6 days.
6 days.
But they encourage you to have a daily practice around it. I think if you do the daily practice, it really works. But back to my great revelation that of kind of a hurtful pattern in my life that was really, you know, it was showing me how much I was getting in my own way, just from an internal thinking process. And how, you know, also how it was affecting my relationship with my wife. But that has been the greatest burden lifted that I've ever known, is just being aware of it and having, you know, relationship is the ultimate mirror. You see yourself and that other person, and they will see themselves through you. And if that other person is becoming disgruntled and angry, there's probably a cue for you and what you're doing to evoke that in them, if you have the awareness, or if you want to really see it.
Yeah, if you
right?
want to. That's such a good choice of words.
It's hard to want to see it because we all want to, you know, we all want to be right in art. Like, they're mad, like I'm not, I'm right. They're the deeper part is like, what am I doing to make that person feel angry? Am I doing anything? What, you know, it's usually something that's in their own subconscious, something, you know, the wounded, like, little inner child that feels unsafe. And instead of like, and there's ways to express something that can make that person's inner child feel safe, so that you're not evoking some sense of like anger or frustration. But Hoffman was just a great way to get to understand some of these things. And for me, it was a huge catalyst for, you know, getting rid of some things I needed to get rid of.
Something that you had mentioned in another podcast episode that I got to listen to in prep for our conversation, you mentioned that when we were young, not knowing if people wanted to be around you for the right reasons, or if it was because of a well-known last name. Do you mind, in this, actually, not even doing, I'll touch on something that, because I want to see if that's a pattern that you also had to deconstruct or had to come to terms with. But you mentioned, you know, what was it like when we first met? I remember the field we met on dude, I'll get choked up just thinking about this. The field we met on for Little League football. Just how beautiful, pure the world seems at, you know, 4th grade, so 10 years old. And I remember just the crazy oversized shoulder pads they were all wearing. Your dad's a coach. Chart Westcott's dad's a coach. Shout out to Chart Westcott. We both know that not only MVP of our team, but probably MVP of the entire region in Texas we're from in 4th grade, 5th grade. He's basically Emmett. He was basically Emmitt Smith, size and speed at 10 years old.
Yeah, no joke.
Huge. And it just, we joking in prep for our podcast, I was just texting Bradley of like, what went through your mind? What question I'm going to ask you is, what went through your mind? We're 4th and goal against the Bulldogs. And you're like, I just pray to God Chart Westcott scores for us. Because that was our whole team strategy. Yeah. Your dad had a great one. Just give the ball to Chart. But I remember going to that field across the street from Armstrong, and just how light, pure. It's kind of like you see the beauty of painting, and you're picking up a brush for the first time. It's only pure potential. Growing up in Texas, it's like, okay, we get to play this sport that our entire neighborhood reveres.
Yeah. It
revolves around in so many ways.
In the era of the Dallas Cowboys, too.
Yes, era of
early 90s or mid-90s, yeah.
So. Crazy, the whole world. I mean, it's the biggest sport in the country. Most eyes on, you know, this sport in our country, on our team, in our hometown. 3 Super Bowls at the time that we're learning this sport. Brothers, all of our brothers, so many older brothers between you and I that also played the sport. So I remember kind of just all of this going into this purity, and then you realize whether you're really good at it or not. You realize how hard it is. You realize, wow, catching this thing, painting with this brush it's quite different than what I see other people having these results with, and how hard it is to actually make art that looks good, to actually become good at the sport. But the reason I get almost choked up thinking about it is also, I remember it actually has a little to do with that purity, but also to do this reality of at 10, and this podcast is so dedicated to the inner side of creation and the inner side of being, that I love erring on the side of just insane candor. And I remember even at 10, so I was listening to this podcast episode a few days ago of you talking about people wanting to orient around you because of just the name. And I remember at 10 being like, whoa, this guy's dad owns, I don't know if he owned it at the time, but I think Dallas Stars.
Yeah, he did. Fourth grade, he.
Fourth grade.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, I want to be friends with him. My selfish orientation. And I would never let you know it. Be like, oh, we just like the same things.
It's so beautiful that you share that now. I love that.
And it's just, there's no I don't think, no need for an apology for it. In fact,
none.
More powerful than the apology is just the candor of like,
yeah.
I remember at 10 thinking that. So you did have to have an antenna up.
Yeah.
But I remember that in 6th grade thinking like, man, I haven't seen Bradley in a while. Like, how can we hang out? It certainly helped that you were awesome kid, awesome dude. So fun to be around. But I remember going to spend the night at your house, second spend the night I've ever done in my life. And I remember being like, this is so fun. We're friends. And then getting so homesick. And I'm like, wait, I really want to go home. I think I want to go home more, but how's this going to look? Oh no, I'm never going to get invited back. And ultimately just choosing fear and being scared and just calling my mom, hey, can you come pick me up? But I remember having that social dynamic understanding even at 10. Okay, this is a bright light to be next to. And I don't know how many of our friends felt that way, but I know that it was almost like, dude, this is one of those things to openly talk about.
Yeah, it's cool. I've never openly talked about it, but at that time, before the internet and the era when the Dallas Morning News sports page was probably the most read literature in the Dallas community. The Stars and the Rangers were kind of exciting things. My dad owned both of them. So that was an exciting thing for people. His name was all over the place consistently. As you beautifully shared, as kids too, you want to go to these games, and it's this idea of kind of getting close to it and then going and enjoying all of what that could offer.
I remember going to a Mavs game, I guess just through the hookup of your dad being in the sports world. We went to a Mavs game and a ball literally bounced into my hands and too much for my brain to handle, to where, it's totally it was exciting and underscored again with you're such, every one of our friends knows, such an amazing, just look at the life you lead, such an amazing human as well, but a magnetic pull towards a lesser self or a selfish desire that probably, it was beautiful to hear you say it in that other episode. Just kind of entangled the orientation of, are these people around me for the right reasons? Or
that honestly, that was the true genesis of me choosing to go to SEAL selection. I wanted, there's other factors kind of driving me there, but deep down, the strongest force was I wanted a no bullshit feedback environment of what I was underneath my dad's last name, or my last name, my dad's name. Because even in college, even if no one even thought that, even if it wasn't a true conscious or subconscious thought of people around me at all, for some it'd probably be repellent. I have no idea, but at a young age, I was exposed to that sort of thing, which, what a beautiful luxury to have that sort of incredible child to go on these sports games. But
and to underscore, your dad was also an awesome individual too.
So it's only a beautiful thing that I'm infinitely grateful for. But as a child, as a kid, it's definitely disorienting because you don't really know what is authentic and the people around you, are they there authentically? And I think ultimately, the ones who generally over time you learn as you grow, emotionally, you can tell with your antenna, who's your real friend and who's not. But
do you mind spending more time on that? Because I've never heard someone with that type of background openly talk about.
I
I don't think
either.
I've ever heard of that.
Yeah. I mean, I've always had, we all have intuitive awareness, but I don't think I had like a really clear intuition at a young age, at, 15, 16, 15 to 30. I didn't really have a clear intuition. And your brains are still developing as men until your late 20s. So like it's hard to have a clear intuition when your brain is not really interpreting reality at the highest level. But I had this, because it was such a common iterative force around me at a young age of, I think starting in the second grade with the Rangers. Actually, the Rangers were second. So starting in fourth grade. But even before then, he had had a lot of success, and so people kind of knew who he was. And at that age, I could feel that sort of force from people. And it became so automatic, especially in a town like Dallas, where sports is such a dominant theme and exciting theme. It just became something that it was a barrier for myself. It was a barrier for me to like really even like be vulnerable to people around me, because ultimately I never felt safe about who like truly saw me in like the deepest sense, which is interesting because I think that also led to me, lacking my own intimacy with myself in certain ways. Which I haven't really thought about, but this is part of life. Like what a beautiful, like the luckiest fucking gift in the world. But
Well, our strengths are our weaknesses kind of thing.
Yeah. But it drove me to go want to have my mettle tested. It drove me to want to go to a true meritocracy where it didn't matter what your name was, and if you were blue, black, white, green, like nothing mattered except for how you showed up physically, emotionally, with integrity under the most austere conditions humans can create. And that's what I wanted. And that's where I started to like finally begin to have like more confidence around who I was and kind of discover who I was without that kind of reflection of what I was worried other people might, why I was worried to be friends with me. So, in a way I'm extra grateful that it drove me to try to do something kind of a little bit extraordinary that I probably wouldn't have done otherwise. And, but yeah, it is a rare topic,
Yeah.
It's kind of like this taboo thing, like don't let the rich kids son, like.
No, it's so lame that it is a taboo topic that is so in everybody's face. Like people, if you grow up in America, you are going to have 2,800 messages a day around worshiping wealth. And we grew up in an affluent neighborhood. In the last 10 years, I have such comfort to talk about that, because I think that needs to be part of the narrative too. That people that come up from a neighborhood of means, my dad, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, all entrepreneurs, and coming up from in a household that just talked about business leadership, talked about, I mean, at 14 years old, we weren't talking about Michael Jordan at the dinner table. We were talking about Herb Kelleher, CEO of Southwest Airlines. My dad is a recruiter and owns a placement recruitment business in Dallas, Texas. So we would talk about these things. And a lot of these things can only come out if you talk about, okay, this is real background. Yeah. I was starting things with my parents' help at 18. I remember I lost $25K of my parents' money on the first business when I was 22 and felt awful for a year and a half. And also felt like for many moons, I just, don't mention that part. Don't mention like that it came from your parents. But I'm so fucking thankful that my parents were willing to invest me then and then invest me in the next thing, even after losing $25K of their money, which was a gargantuan amount at the time. And that, like these aspects of the story of parents supporting children, encouraging kids to be founders, or just what it's like to be a founder when your father's a founder that's had success, and what's the healthy and unhealthy aspects of those things.
Yes.
Like that, it might not apply to a whole lot of the audience, but there are people out there with greatness to provide to the world, to give, that also need to hear pieces of these stories, or that have friends, colleagues that have a background of X, Y, or Z facets that we need to hear these stories. And I mean, there's, I don't know, 7 people that have a dad and, that owns 2 sports teams and going through school, but that's such a unique aspect. It's only one dimension. It's a very small aspect, but it is a unique aspect that it was just so interesting and fascinating to hear you talk about it so openly when I was listening to another episode for our prep, that I was like, holy shit, I can't believe I've never really asked Bradley about that. Are there any other aspects to having a wildly successful father at an early age in a town that loves business, loves sports, but also loves business, that was a healthy aspect, and maybe an aspect that you're like, oh, this is actually this kind of sucks, because even just hearing you talk about pushing you to do extraordinary things, like the bar, from when you were probably 17, thinking about, oh, okay, what's going to be my legacy, was already so fucking high. That has to be a mind trip. But maybe not, maybe. But are there other aspects that we haven't touched on before we move on to other fun topics that I want to talk to you about?
Look, I think at a minimum, it's constructive, cathartic, and healthy to have these conversations, no matter what. Like, this is a microcosm of the broader human experience, that there shouldn't be like societal taboo topics, right? Unless they're hurtful of other people, unless they're generating hate and things like that. But like, we should have the courage to discuss the most, even like kind of icky one, like discuss like, someone else's, their father's wealth and how that privilege it generated for them. Like, it's just kind of like, all you feel to that person is like, you shouldn't have a single complaint in the world, right? But that person is also a human that goes through their own human experience.
I don't feel that at all. That's why I'm so fascinated with this.
That's kind of like the topical way of seeing it.
Right.
And it's also like, for, as an entrepreneur, and as a father, as the masculine of your own family with 3 beautiful girls, you also want to give them opportunities in some way. It doesn't mean necessarily it'll be the same way that, my dad did for me or whatever else, but like you do work, I imagine, toward giving them a chance to discover their passions, their curiosities, to like have the most happy, fulfilling life, not just giving them money, but like helping them discover what makes them like really engaged and happy as a human being. And like, if that's money, if it's university, if it's, a little balance sheet to invest from, like,
it's two things that I think about intentionally is to cap my own success. If business is a dharmic thing that I have a wiring for, and we'll see if it is, but in building startups for the last 17 years, I seem to be oriented towards that. But if they have a certain level of success, my goal is to cap that success so that it is not this overbearing shadow. That's why I've also loved, for listeners to know, another fun common thread between Bradley and I's, Bradley's younger brother, William, who I remember growing up and seeing as just like, almost like a mini you. I 2 years ago said, hey, I started Magic Mind, brought him on. I was like, dude, you should be joining me in building this company. And then I made him CEO. There's been a healthy, through every morning, an hour of intense philosophical reflection on what I'm good at, also a reflection on enough is as good as a feast, a reflection on where others around me are better, and around this of 2 things for my daughters that's intentional around this topic is cap my own success to where enough is as good as a feast. I have kind of my idea of what is enough. Beyond that, donate it away, as well as hand off these roles or titles that others might be better suited for. But then, and certainly even in the notoriety side of things, like I reluctantly even do these podcast episodes. It's the team asking me to, because they're like, you already have all the equipment. You've already been podcasting.
But you're so good at it, and people benefit from it, so you should keep doing it.
Right. It's a surrender to a duty aspect of things. Okay, I can be helpful in the team here. But the other, so there's capping my own success, but then also one of our mutual friends, Boone Brasso, another founder friend. We're so fortunate that we have these founder friends in our lives, because he said something. So, I don't know if he's ever opened a philosophical book in his life, and yet he said something that blew my mind. He said, I want my kids to go to college having no idea how successful their father is. I was like,
love that.
Damn.
Boone is just deeply philosophical, and he's always had that kind of deep wisdom. But that's such a great thought.
Right? Isn't it? It blew me away to where I was like, that's now part of how I'm going to operate.
Well, that takes shadow awareness. It takes the awareness of like what would make you want to show the world, right? Whether it's the car or whatever, like having that sort of awareness of what is looking to be satisfied and knowing where it shows up and how it shows up and how to, you can't kill it. You can only be aware of it and have agency over it. But
shadow awareness. Yeah. Tell us more about what you mean by that. Because that's a beautiful way of putting it.
Look, every human has angel and demon, right? Sometimes, even Christ himself was a demon at times, right? As in like a shitty person, but he went through his own transformation and developed his own, what we know as Christ consciousness and a Christ heart, right? Through really deep work and really paying attention to, the deep teachers of truth with a capital T.
And still love. Heard the voices of the demon.
Yeah.
I think he tells Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. I'll have none at thy hands. When Peter's like, hey, if you're going to die, if we go to Jerusalem, we should bail. And he's like, get thee behind me, Satan. So he still hears them. He's aware of them. That's a beautiful way of putting it, aware of them. You don't kill them.
That's why they're shadows. They're behind you, but they're very much always with you. And the more that, and I think this is honestly a really healthy topic to talk about right now, because being aware of shadows, being aware of behavioral patterns and talking about them, it'd be like for like an addict, people go to AA and they talk. That's why, they go to AA and they share, hey, I'm an alcoholic, I'm Peter or whatever. It's a healthy exercise to say it out loud. Right. And so, it can also be for, say, greed. If we're going back to like what Boone said, Boone is actively saying, I never want my kids to see me as, greedy or flashy. Because that's also shadow. It's it comes down to, deep down, like, not to get too deep, but I can't help it.
No, please go as deep on this conversation. On this podcast,
it all comes down to some part deep inside of you that just wants to be, loved. That was a part of you as a kid that, just something was missing, and you're still searching for it by like this, extra that, like, and it comes down to just, it can be very helpful to know that, there's a driving force of those behaviors, whether they suit you or they don't suit you. And if you want to study them and find the lesson in them, self-reflect, self-examine, talk to a therapist about it, do that plant medicine journey that with someone who's trusted and revered, try Hoffman or whatever, like try the process of deep self-examination to learn the forces that, created your shadows and that still activate your shadows. And then let's all talk about them together in a constructive way, not like get stuck in it. That's not healthy. But I think we should be free to discuss it more often than we kind of culturally do right now. Right. But there's a balance. You also don't want to get stuck in that sort of like victimhood of your shadows mindset. That's dangerous. That stops a lot of progress.
These are such healthy ways of approaching, and then even just that the terminology is so helpful. It's really interesting that I mentioned the thing that our friend has said, if I want my kids to go to college and have no idea how successful their dad is, and your immediate response is that's a great awareness of just the shadow side of things. Even that terminology, it would have sounded foreign to probably both of us at 18 or
totally
at 20. How would younger Bradley have dealt with, let's say, 25-year-old Bradley dealt with these shadow elements of how you're wired or these patterns? How would 25-year-old Bradley have dealt with them? How would 33-year-old Bradley deal with them? Does Bradley today deal with them? And it could be as recent as, right after the Hoffman process. But I would love to just hear those three phases where at 33, you're quote unquote an adult, Navy SEAL. And yet I imagine you'd look back and say, oh God, like probably not in the healthiest way.
Yeah, that's a great question, because like, you can only learn when you're really ready to learn. And that there's a long spectrum of that point and how deep it can go, deep inside your wiring. I don't think you're able to like really see the deep shadows until you have fully committed to being on that path of, I believe this is your term, because I said self something, and you corrected me with self transcendence. I think that was you.
Oh yeah. There's Maslow's hierarchy of needs has produced a huge fascination with self-actualization.
Yes, actualization versus
that was
transcendence.
the top of the pyramid of needs. And then in the last 10 years of his life, after the original pyramid, I think he created it in his mid-30s, late 30s, and it became so famous. But then in the last 10 years of his life, decades later, he was like, no, there's another level, which is self-transcendence.
Yeah, which means I interpret that, and it's deeper than we can go in like a little soundbite, but like I interpret that as really letting go of serving yourself, letting go of being selfish in every expression of your life, right? Like, and that's kind of what, go back to Christ or Buddha or whoever, whichever prophet or enlightened being, but they've fully committed to others, and that act of love, that act of, that vibration of the highest sort of, you're here to serve other people, and you really walk the walk when no one's looking to. But how do you explain that to yourself when you're not ready to learn it? That's actually a great question. I'd actually love to turn that around and ask you, how would you explain to 18-year-old James, what shadow work means and how to integrate that process and actually build a practice around it? Because I think you're gonna have a better answer than me, so I want to honor that.
I really do want to know what 25-year-old Bradley would have done around these topics, trauma, around challenges, around insecurities. I mean, that was 10-year-old me was operating out of, I want to be loved.
Yeah.
Okay, this person seems to be loved. This person's dad seems to be loved. Even my dad thinks it's cool. So there's a part of me that's just, man, I want to be loved. It's the same thing for Johnny Coons. And I've told him this since then, of the cool guy in high school. And every high school has one of these. The really cool guy. Yeah, I mean, you both were like the pillars of cool.
No, definitely was not, but he was.
No, really, there's if people look up the record books, they'd see both of you as the coolest of the cool in a neighborhood that loved athletics, loved achievement, and you guys crushed it on these scales. And I remember the same thing of like, man, I want to be close to what people seem to agree is the really popular kids, and kind of fighting for that. 1 foot in, 1 foot out, where it's like, okay, I can excel in the academic side of things, but I play basketball, so I kind of have 1 foot into the sports world. That's what everybody, it's just written on every wall. Like, people care more about that.
Yeah.
7th grade, 11th grade, than, your grades. And so I had this semblance of cool and kind of worked my way in, but it was like socially understanding situations and how do I get an invite to this? Very similar mental calculus for probably that the vast majority in the middle, where it's like you're not completely above it all, and you're just really monk-like as a 16-year-old, and you just don't need to go to the parties, and you're not the ones that the party follows you everywhere around. So I think this is a pretty common story, but I remember there was just wanting to be loved, and it was like, okay, this is a shortcut to realizing if I'm lovable, is if the person that has all the choices to spend time with anyone would choose to spend time with me. I think that 10-year-old me was the same 18-year-old me, where my shadow work was or just understanding of the lower self, the selfish desires, came from a place of complete insecurity within myself, to where I was like, how do I outsource my security? Because that's not something that you find within yourself. No. That's going to be something that if I can find these 5 people that I respect, do the things that they respect, that they see as achievement, if I can check those boxes and I know that they're secure, and I can do the things that they've done and or are validating, telling me like, yeah, go to this school, get these grades, start a business. If you can, I remember telling my sister when I was like 12, I'm going to be a millionaire by 27. And I look back, I'm like, what is up with that 12-year-old's wiring where they think that's the thing to aim for? They think that that's going to elicit, I don't know, being impressive to a
There's
to an
nothing
older
wrong with
sister.
that wiring, by the way. That usually drives the greatest achievements. You know, the question is, are they impactful in like a conscious way? Like,
Right. And it was very unconscious. It was very...
So admiring your path and the companies that you built and like your path of investment philosophy, I would say is quite conscious. I would say you chose things that were net positive.
Partially, perhaps. But it was... so I think 18-year-old James or 25-year-old James, the James that was going to the ER at 26 with a heart condition from drinking 6-7 cups of coffee a day and running not only myself but also a company of 100 employees backwards. That me was just under the cultural myth and the cultural and the personal gospel of more. The answer is more.
Right.
Feeling behind? Drink another coffee. Feeling behind? Go and get some other financial career milestone. Feeling behind? Do more. Go faster. And it was, I remember telling Sean Parker, who invested in, is one of the co-founders of Facebook, and I told him when he invested in, or right before he invested in my company in the 20s that ran me into the ER and nearly killed me, I told him, I said, we're going to build a company bigger than Facebook. That's how insecure I was, that I felt like that's, the gospel of maximal more. And I just thought every answer, every insecurity, every issue would be solved by this completely vague, completely inarticulate moreness.
Right. And I think going back to the original question of what I would say to myself, but in this context, what you would say to, say, 25-year-old James who was running tilt before the heart anomaly, would be to communicate in a way that his awareness would understand that the more that he's seeking isn't going to come from tilt success. Although sometimes it takes that to happen for you to all of a sudden feel it and get there and be like, okay, that's not it.
Yes. And
so like,
and
but that's what your 25-year-old self will understand.
Yeah,
right?
and exactly. And I
so
think that's maybe the best way of articulating it, that right when you asked the question, I was like, oh, this is the answer I should give. And
well, also, by the way, and beautifully, it goes down like, I'm not saying drinking this is going to like give you the answers, but when you create the neurochemical conditions in your brain to think as clearly as possible, and you develop a practice of self-examination, you don't have to, if the woo-woo-ness of meditation is distracting or disturbing, you can meditate with your eyes open, go on a walk, leave your phone at home. The phone is antithetical to kind of extracting deep, critical, creative thought. But, what I would...
Journal. Write down how you're feeling. It's a great form of meditation.
Yes. Do it ideally first thing in the morning, but also do it later in the day too. Do it whenever you can do it, but just start the practice to do it. And that's what I would tell 15-year-old Bradley or 20-year-old Bradley or 30-year-old Bradley. Because until you start to self-examine, you're just going to continue to live from your subconscious programming. And that can be great. It can be great and sometimes bad. But ultimately, it will steer you directions that sometimes, it can be very rarely or it can be often, that are going to continue to drive you towards this like cul-de-sac that you don't want to end up in. And it's hard to know what that is until you learn the narratives of the mind and learn them iteratively so that you can become so familiar with how your mind operates that you and the emotions that accompany narratives that you can learn to have a little bit of agency over those thoughts and those emotions. And then you can start to see what's real and not real, right? And drinking 10 cups of coffee a day is not going to be helpful for that. 2 or 3 might. I think it is. But just committing to finding your inner optimized physiological way of being. And it starts with your mind. And if you can understand and heal your mind, you'll calm and heal your nervous system, and your whole body kind of follows too. So like starting the process of self-examination and meditation is probably the only thing I could tell 20-year-old Bradley. I couldn't even, like, why even try to contextualize it in all these ways, right? Like, just start and see where it takes you, because it will take you where you want to go.
It is so beautiful that it's so self-evident. So reflection in the morning. It can be so helpful by your meeting at 9:30 that it does not require some quantum leap of faith. Okay, this is going to work out 3 years from now, 3 months from now, that day. Just putting down pen to paper on what you're feeling right now, an hour later, it's so self-evident.
Yep.
And yet it's so beautifully simple as you put it up. Just start, kick the tires of this idea that might seem like there's no way reflection, going on a walk, can be helpful. I need to X, Y, Z. And yet just start and see what happens.
That's usually the biggest barrier people for why they don't start a meditation practice is I don't have time for it. And that's a real feeling. You can, especially the people who are working, like, you're going to work at 8 and you're leaving at 8, you're doing 12 hour shifts and you have kids, like, you can feel like you don't have time, but you do. Like, it actually saves time, as you know, because the more you discover how busy your mind is, and the more you iteratively discover that, the more you'll discover that a lot of it is just total chatter and not actually something that you need to act on, right? And like, you end up saving so much time and you become way more efficient and effective with your time, which I think everyone wants. Like, we want to be more efficient and effective with our time and how we choose to spend it.
Right. Is cleaning the windshield, is that a waste of time if you're going to be going 70 miles an hour down the highway?
Yeah. And also contemplating while you're cleaning the windshield. Use that as a chance to just kind of see where your nervous system's at. See if you're acting from an elevated physiological state. If you are, okay, cool. I need to take a few deep breaths, calm myself. Boom, clarity comes. Okay, I was going the wrong direction. I need to turn 2 miles past that town behind me. Like, find those ways and introduce practices throughout your day, and find the truer path.
The other answer, that right when you asked the question, for 18-year-old, 25-year-old, 30-year-old James, would be just go do it. Do it however you think, because 18-year-old me is so. I mean, I came out of undergrad at 22, 100 miles an hour. I wouldn't have been able to listen to anyone, and learning by doing is so valuable that I don't know if I would have, to exactly what you said of like, saying it's one thing, but breaking through. It's for even just what we're talking about, the morning reflection, the power of morning reflection, even just 15 minutes. The power of something like that, saying it to someone, I can speak from the experience of, I've gone up the 3 stories to the attic, I've broken in the attic, I've done all of these, and there's nothing there. The single cultural addiction that our society still encourages is ambition. An endless ambition, gospel, more ambition. I just need to be more ambitious. We need to go faster. I've seen that upper room, that the attic, and how barren that is, to where it's really easy for me to go back to the foundations, the basics, the first level, and be like, oh no, there's more here than I'm given credit for. Just the hour in the morning before the kids are up. Like, I feel like that's heaven, true heaven on earth, that quiet stillness before the day starts. But I needed to, and I would imagine 18, 22-year-old me, no matter what articulation anyone could have provided, just needed to go and see that there's nothing up there, or it'll send me to the ER before I realize, okay, maybe there is something to an alternative path. But the area that I want to turn the conversation to right now is on your experience, you're the addicts of the spaces you've explored. And I would love if you wouldn't mind, maybe you've touched on a few of these, telling us 3 stories in your life that have helped shape who you've become. Maybe you've mentioned some of them, but I would love to know, and I love asking guests this question, what are 3 stories in your life that have helped shape who you've become?
Well, I mean, I would say fatherhood. Obviously, like,
Awesome.
I think for me personally, and there's a reason why I'm so passionate about this process of self-discovery, is because, you know, I personally have made like so many like mistakes that I reflected on with like, damn, like I wish I hadn't done that, or shame or guilt, and you get stuck in those things, and you know, learning what drove those things, being aware of it, and having a little bit more agency of how to avoid it in the future. That's a hard process, but it's very doable. And I think for me, like having a baby is the ultimate mirror, because babies are they're like a negative film. Every single impression you make on them in front of them, just your state of being, your personal stress level, whether you're showing up stressed or showing up in this pure state of love, like, or somewhere in between, which we mostly are, that will make an impression, an imprint on that film. And knowing that we have this beautiful gift to, you know, raise these pure beings of love, and to do our best to try to keep them as close to that until life starts to like get in the way. But to have, you know, to just love on them and enjoy that feedback loop that we get to, that oxytocin that we get, that we give them, we get it in that beautiful circle of that's no accident. That made me want to become a better person, right? Not showing up stressed, realizing when I'm stressed, why am I in this negative state before I go in the Hawks room? What about my day in the last 3 hours or hour drove me to be in this stressful state? It could be looking for more. It could be, I haven't earned enough, made enough, I haven't done this enough. Being aware of that thought pattern and how it's shaping my emotional state, and seeing it, feeling it, and then letting it go, and then getting back into a state of presence and love, so that I can be that energetic, loving force for my baby. Like that to me is like, what an experience to get to have. And humans been doing it for a long time, but like, it's also just, you know, it's the ultimate honor, and it's the best job ever. So I have to put that as my top experience too.
I've heard psychedelic, the term psychedelic is mind bending, and I've heard it said that
The ultimate psychedelic.
What's that?
The ultimate psychedelic.
Yeah, like the ultimate mind bending experience is to have this thing that is wholly dependent on you.
Yeah, and if you know, pay attention, you know, there's a lot of hourly teachings that happen from it, you know, and what drives your inner state and how to want to improve it. But yeah, I would say, you know, and doing also relationship, like your partner, also like what a gift of a mirror, like to learn how your own inner state, your own, you know, energy, how that can evoke someone else's life experience. And if you're walking around stressed and looking for more and not satisfied with XYZ, because, you know, that person's going to have to navigate that emotional state, that unseen energy with you. And that's a lot to take away from someone else. And so, you know, I'm trying really hard to be better at that, and to, you know, be a better partner and father through that sort of commitment of not bringing my own kind of inner dialogue to the fold, like trying to focus on real presence. So being a father, husband, and Hoffman, loop, all those things are all really powerful experiences for me, as far as things that have really shaped me thus far. So I would say a teammate who had the greatest influence on me was a guy when I was a new guy at SEAL Team 3. He was pretty much our leader. He was our day-to-day leader. He wasn't our like ground force commander or platoon chief, but he was an LPO, leading petty officer. and he'd been in for probably 12 years. He got in 2001, like went 6 combat tours, something like that, by the time I got to SEAL Team 3. And he was tough, but he was also like gentle and thoughtful and so dedicated to helping other people improve, to be the best warrior possible. But he was really fucking tough. I mean, like he was the hardest teacher I've ever had by an order of magnitude I can't explain. And it was stressful. There was always a lesson in what he was teaching, but also the lesson for me was navigating stress with how intense he was trying to teach it. And his name was Brad Kavner. And during our workup to our first deployment, which is kind of like spring training for the season, our workup to our first deployment, which is to Afghanistan, we all knew we were going there. So when you're training for war, like everything matters. Every little iteration of practice really matters, because you know where you're going and what you're going to do and what the stakes are. And Brad was the most intense human being I've ever met, and the perfection he expected from people. I learned a lot about myself through Brad. I mostly learned about my flaws. I've kind of since then learned, all the flaws weren't there. He was just really intense, and he made everything feel like a flaw. I say that lovingly. So Brad passed away right when we got home during a parachute training accident. But he, the direction he set me on was really probably the most powerful calibration toward radical self-accountability. In ways that I just, I had never experienced before. And I realized how much I would make excuses if things didn't turn out the way they're supposed to in my head about my role in it. I always had some narrative like, well, we were supposed to do this, but that guy didn't quite do that, so it didn't happen. I never had acknowledged what was my role with his role and the other person's role that enabled this failure to happen. I had an ability to always say that I was doing something okay, but it wasn't all my fault. And there are plenty of times where it actually was all my fault and reflection. And Brad had a really intense way of remediation through such intense, authentic expression, because the stakes were so high for what we were doing. But he really meant it, and you just pretty much, he was the guy that you didn't want to let down. So, the whole process of going into the military and going into the Navy and being a SEAL, that was all, the experience I will always look back on. It's shaped me in ways that I will forever be grateful for. You could ask me, you could write me a check for anything in the world for, whatever amount of money, to say, would you go back in time and choose another path? And I would say no, because I wouldn't want to change the perspective I have now through those experiences.
2 questions on that. One is going to be just, did you learn to borrow some of your approaches to leadership from leaders like Brad within the SEALs today, as a father even? But the first question is more around, was there a huge part of you that was seeking that radical accountability? That's what you're looking for in some ways of going to a place so austere, so removed from anything that a dad's biography could ever remove. Is that, if that resonated with you so deeply?
Well, that's why his role and that catalyst experience for me to discover that I had not yet really been authentic with myself and radical self-accountability. I had not been, yes, to answer your question, I was looking for that, but I didn't quite see beyond the surface. I was not able to see how, how I have a hand in everything that shapes around me. And there's in a tactical context that can be especially true. So he was probably the most critical catalyst in my life of teaching me self-accountability. my dad and teachers and coaches, all like young ages, totally the most important for us. But like as an adult who's trying to, make sense of the world, and in this case, a really unique, universe of kind of training for combat, going to combat, it had a really strong impact on me. So I'll always have that with me. And there's things about his teaching that I'll take with me, and there's things that I will not take with me that, and it just made it even, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about Brad, and, his initials are tattooed on my shoulder, and he is, he was a brother, and it was a huge loss to the SEAL teams when he passed. But that kind of makes his teachings that much more powerful for everyone that knew him. And it was a lot of people that he touched. So like, it seems like the ones that go the soonest tend to have the greatest impact. And he had that before he passed. And then when he passed, it was just like that much more heavy. So.
Yeah. His death, it's so interesting in that I've had a guest on here before, the father that was diagnosed with ALS, and he's since passed away from the podcast he was on maybe 4 months ago. And in the episode, he mentioned just how we talked about how death can become a teacher, that living lessons or living as a father, as an influence in someone else's life, just won't have the impression, won't have the experience of death, the lessons that were told before the person passed. These things that you're touching on can have a resonance that it can only be achieved when it's like, okay, the death itself becoming a lesson of like, holy shit, every moment is not a given.
Yeah, and you can create that every day. Sometimes it takes having someone close to you to pass to really remind yourself that we're all mortal beings. But you can evoke that. I think I've learned, not in a like conscious way after Brad died. Also like Gordy Bailey,
right?
Super dear friend,
college,
probably the most like magnanimous, loving, happy guy in the world. He passed away at 18. So like, those things remind us that we're mortal. But like when you can integrate that knowing into your daily life in the morning as a part of your journaling or meditation or reflection, whatever, and just remind yourself in a real conscious way that, we're all going to die. We just don't know when. And I'm saying this out loud to remind myself, actually.
Everything I say out loud is to remind myself. I mean, that was, and I'm going to say this to remind myself, that was, Socrates' quote on philosophy. Philosophy is the preparation for death.
So true.
And that accountability, what a great point on. There's so many things you could point to a teacher in the impact they could have across different aspects of knowledge or information or wisdom or tactics. But holding you to a crazy standard of self-accountability, it's, as you're talking, it made me think that's maybe reflect on, that's maybe one of the best things in my 20s was when my previous company failed, Tilt, which for listeners, I lost some of Bradley's money. And when Tilt failed, one of the best parts, maybe the best part, was that we had built this business to such a high profile in 2 years, valued at almost $400 million, and then sold for a fraction of that to Airbnb. And I've said in previous episodes, it sounds cool selling Airbnb, but it was such a failure in a personal and a collective way that it was easily, probably 16-month depression afterwards, and recuperation probably 16 months leading up to it too, because it was a 6-year attempt to not do that. And but one of the best things in my entire 20s was the scathing press around how we failed. It basically had this high-profile company and failed in a high-profile way, and all of the blame on me as the CEO was so beautiful, because I think I hoped for, let me just be able to frame the stories. We sold our company to Airbnb. And then it was like, nope, there's no lipstick, no amount of lipstick on this pig that would make it seem like we did something great. It is so out in the open that we failed. And I'm so thankful for that, because the only option, there's no way to reframe it to change the narrative. It was like, oh, this is written as all failure by young CEO that just was in over his skis, and right or wrong, and in that framing, it was beautiful that it was over rotated towards the only way I can really process this or talk about this with anyone is to process how much of this was my fault. And I'm so thankful for that, because the world does not give you many opportunities. There are many teachers like your teacher, Brad, that holds you to a crazy standard of accountability. The people that love you the most want to give you like 7 outs. Well, they just did. Someone else did this. The board member did this, or the other people made mistakes as well.
But also, what you're saying is so true, and I love the radical ownership because it's beautiful.
So beautiful.
But also, it wasn't a massive failure because you built something massive. And I love, so there's a lot of parallel truths here.
Yes, I love that early in the episode you said there are 2 truths. What a great
many truths to everything,
phrase.
But like it wasn't a total failure because you also, during that time, you built up an idea. It was a huge idea at the time. You were
But
giving
let me
people
cut you off
employment,
because I'm going to cut you off because I now, from a place of reflection, security, love, recognizing the blessing on the other side of it, to where I cherish that the failing aspect of it. I cherish that side of it, because this, as Bill Gates, famously said, success is a pretty terrible teacher. That I cherish the cultivation of the wisdom gained so much that I'm like, no, that needed to go south, or that I need that narrative. At least I can get so much out of milking that narrative. Failure, then I can't get much out of, like, these things worked out. And it is talking to a Navy SEAL. It was all, none of it was life or death. And it was, even though in my head I thought a lot of times it was a playground of sorts to learn. And then, yes, take as much as possible, only way that it makes sense. Especially one of the hardest parts of losing people that you love, losing their money, the only way that it makes sense, losing trust or dishonoring the trust placed as a leader, as a CEO, only way it makes sense is to leverage that experience, that PhD in life and business and myself, to leverage it to serve people as well as I know how in the next chapter of learning, of failing forward. But what would be...
Failing forward. Love that.
Indeed. What would be it's a great author, Richard Rohr, it's one of his articulations. To fail, life is to fail, and to fail forward.
Yeah.
What would be a last remaining life experience that has helped shift or shape who you've become?
I'll say this kind of gently because, there's a lot of narratives around psychedelics that are distracting and, and like in a evangelical sense, which I've actually participated in. Humbly, I've become evangelical. I was when I was kind of first going through it. And there's also distractions around a total misunderstanding from being told by, society and institutions for many years how unsafe they are. And that's true, they can be unsafe, but they can also be the most transformational experiences ever. So, for anyone listening that, has not explored a psychedelic experience, there's a couple really important things you have to do. You have to find out, a high integrity facilitator, as in someone who really knows what they're doing, that you've met with and feel safe with, that you actually are choosing the right medicine for what you think you need to work through in life. And then just making sure you're truly ready for it and you're not forcing anything so that it can be a gentle experience. But I've become a huge advocate for a lot of them, but particularly MDMA assisted therapy, or MDMA and psilocybin. And I've met with a lot of U.S. senators and congressmen in D.C. with a really impressive group of people from the private sector and kind of tech and philanthropy to kind of undo the stigmas around these treatments and to teach people. And the response rate has been fantastic. And we've been doing it on behalf of veterans because it's important that veterans get access to these tools that can be so powerful and, breaking through the negative narratives in people's heads that come with a lot of things that you do in the military, whether in combat or not in combat, just the way of being, but generally speaking, in kind of being in a violent mindset for a long time. But, for me personally, I started, I can't get hurt for it now or can't get in trouble for it now, but I read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, on my last deployment. And it was like 6 months after I learned TM, Transcendental Meditation, just basic meditation. And someone dropped off his book to my doorstep right when I was starting to kind of learn a little bit of kind of dissonance in my heart, like realizing that I was not as happy as I wanted to be.
How old were you when this was happening?
34. And I didn't really know anything. I think I'd eaten psilocybin mushrooms when I was like 16 with my brother Alex. I didn't feel anything. And, I think I'd taken MDMA at like a club a couple times, but like I was also drinking a lot of alcohol. So like I didn't really, there's no gain from it. But I began to really understand that if done with deep intention and kind of humility and knowing, these things can be very powerful tools to heal and unlock and expand. And so I came home and I found a friend outside the military and I asked for ways to get psilocybin and LSD. And I started with just psilocybin, I think, but I would take 100 milligrams to like 1,500 milligrams. And I would just stay at home and put on an eye mask and lay back and meditate for 3 hours. And I did that, a few days a week, and started to develop a real new awareness, and started to, I say awareness, like awareness of things in my mind that were holding me back. I started to also actively meditate, and I kind of built my own mantra around trying to feel compassion and gratitude and love. And I would say compassion, and I would think about 5 people that I wanted to feel compassion for that generally didn't. And I'd wait until I felt the literal heart neuron activation when I felt each person. And I'd wait, and then I'd hit each person. It'd be a new person every time. It could be the same 5 people. And I'd wait till I'd feel something in my heart. That was also my discovery of heart intelligence for the first time. And then I would focus on gratitude. And I would think about all the things I'm stressed about. Not enough this, not enough that, not enough like safety, and I'll just be so grateful for what I had because there was so much. And I'd wait until I felt that in my heart. And then I'd switch to love. And I would just think, how nice would it be if I felt love instead of anger all the time? And
did you feel anger?
Well, I'll rephrase that, like not anger all the time, but, and I say this with deep love for any of my SEAL friends that are listening to this, if they do, that's actually, I think, controlled aggression is like the inner code of the warrior, and it's important. And society needs men that can have controlled aggression. I was just at a point where I was tired of tapping into that.
We tinkered with the defund the police for like 10 minutes a few years ago. We're like, actually, no, let's
big mistake. Society needs
defund the police.
Society needs alpha men to protect it.
And it's so wild that's even my Los Angeles brain's like, wait, I don't know, can we say that? And
say it.
Yeah, that's
break the stigma.
It's actually quite ludicrous to imagine like, no, let's just lose all warrior controlled violent, let's lose all of that, become completely harmless and helpless, and see what happens in the world. If we do that, it's quite insane when you take it to that other extreme.
Look, if with 8 billion people in the world, if everyone goes through like a deep healing self-awareness process, they all still have shadows. So even if like you remove all the police and military, there will be someone of those 8 billion or several 100 million of those 8 billion that will still seek power and control from that shadow to exert it over others, no matter what the healing process they've gone through. However, I think it's a necessary force to have the people out there that strive toward total utopia, right? Like that's all important. All these truths on the spectrum of truth, you know, lowercase t's over the capital T.
Yeah.
You know, I think, but for now, and at least the next several thousand or million years, we need strong men to protect society.
One of my favorite things of the not to make a segue more than 10 seconds, but it's one of my favorite aspects of the Bhagavad Gita, the world's most famous poem, 700 verse poem, 30-minute read, one of the anchor texts of Advaita Vedanta, one of the philosophy that that we talk about often, that I study and teach here in LA, and it's a text of a charioteer, as I touched on earlier, talking to a warrior prince that's in the first chapter trying to get out of the battle, saying we should go study philosophy in the forest. We should not partake in this violence. It's a civil war. So saying this is a battle with our uncles, our kith and kin. This isn't right. And this charioteer, who's symbolic embodiment of God in this text, his guide, divine guide, looks at him and he's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, your role is to protect righteousness, and you're coming up with what's called the spiritual bypass. It's really savvy. That's why I love this chapter of chapter 1, when it's nothing wise is said. It's all him deluding himself of why he should get out of his role, his duty, his responsibility. And yet it's so powerful because it's no fake surface level arguments are made. He actually like speaks really deep philosophical spiritual reasons of why they shouldn't be fighting this battle. And it takes a true divine objective third party to say, no, you're doing this because you're scared, and your real role, and you need to hear this radical accountability, your role is to fight for righteousness, not come up with spiritual reasons to abdicate your responsibility and flee from the battle. But
I love that.
Slight annoying segue that had nothing to do with what you're saying, but it's beautiful that it just, you're like, no, we do need alpha males in protective roles.
Yeah, but conscious alpha males, people that are not blindly following, you know, controlling, aggressive, violent tendencies. Like there needs to be a check and balance within themselves. First and foremost, you need to have an understanding of your own kind of polarity and realize when you're hyper masculine and that's not what we need. We need someone who can be masculine from a calm and controlled place, knowing kind of your softness and how to be soft too. And I think psychedelics are very important to discover that. And so personally at that point, when I was kind of getting out, I was exhausted from having to tap into that kind of aggressive mindset on a day-to-day basis in training, because every evolution you're doing, it's, you know, whether you're, you know, doing close quarters battle or you're skydiving or diving, you're doing it to get to a target, to then play out whatever scenario XYZ of killing whoever. And you shift your mind in each of those situations to be in that sort of state. And it's very benevolent on the surface, but after a while, it becomes exhausting. It's depriving your heart in a certain sense, which, you know, there's masters of it. I have the most amazing friends who've been in for 15, 25, 30 years, who are just these benevolent giants who have mastered how to be the soft father at home and still, you know, control that. And I have deep reverence for how they've done it. For me personally, though, like I was ready to shift. And, you know, psychedelics, you know, and I tinkered with different, you know, medicines and processes and different geographies, and they all played a really powerful hand and teaching me something, and they still are, you know, like a real hero's journey of whatever medicine will give you 1,000 or one huge revelation, probably somewhere in between. And, you know, finding the space to pay attention to what those lessons are and how to integrate them into your life is the real work. And I'm still kind of, so now it's very rare that I do psychedelics.
Really?
Rare. Yeah.
Oh,
Well, so I was just at Burning Man this past week. Got back
Free
yesterday,
pass.
by the way.
Free pass.
Yeah. Kind of serotonin depleted, but yeah, like at Burning Man, I'll take a little bit of psilocybin, maybe some MDMA, and that's pretty much it. Like a
That's
very
so interesting, because a few years ago, and I do want to round this out by you saying that you're advocate for the therapy, but then you also
I'm an advocate for recreationally as well.
And recreationally, but you also said, touched on not going to the extremes of evangelism, or at least you had done that previously. So that's really interesting. I didn't know that you'd gotten to a place now that you rarely.
I'm not chasing. I think at first I was chasing the revelation, and some people kind of get lost in that journey of, chasing the ethereal realm you enter. Fortunately, this is where like my wife played a huge hand in like saying, stop chasing. You've had the teachings, now integrate in certain
Alan
ways.
Watts would say, it's you got the message, hang up the phone.
Yeah, I love that. And my teacher too, she stopped doing psychedelics 35 years ago, and when she told me that, it made me think. And so now, like, I have people that I kind of guide towards certain things, and I encourage it if it's needed. But I think they're very important tools that are misunderstood, that should be understood, but they can't be understood unless we can talk about it in a neutral, objective way. So I'm a huge advocate for at least having conversations around it. And I'm also not afraid to say, recreationally, I think it can be very powerful too. With like anything in life, have reverence and intention with what you're doing. Don't be careless. Ask for guidance if you don't know what you're doing, because you can really make mistakes and you can hurt other people and yourself. But I will say, like, going to, a night in Burning Man, and I have chills, by the way, a night at Burning Man with like some MDMA can be the most beautiful experience in life, because you're already witnessing the most beautiful creative expressions of humans in a landscape where humans are all sharing this gift, generosity, expression, and economy. And they're all there to kind of love, to express gratitude and love toward themselves and each other. And when you feel that on that modality, and you see all the art and the amazing music, it is so powerful and so beautiful. And so talking about recreational use, taboo, but I don't really believe in taboo.
Yeah, and it's wild. We live in a world where it's like, hey, you can drink your 9 beers, and that's fine. We'll talk about
celebrate
that. We'll celebrate it. But you can't talk about MDMA or ayahuasca. Keep that to yourself. Like, that is insane that we have such an acceptance of.
It's changing though. It's changing.
Alcohol, and alcohol. By the way, for people listening, I did ayahuasca 5 years ago. Never felt a call to go back to it. Don't drink. Really, in bed by 8:30. Pretty clean living guy over here. But it's when alcohol comes up at dinner conversation of just our cultural love and global love of that drug. Every once in a while, I'll just speak and be like, that's like the shittiest drug humans have ever come up with. It's just so cheap, and you can make it out of rice, you can make it out of grapes, you can make it out of barley, you can make it out of so many things that is pure economics of why we drink that, why that's so prevalent, ubiquitous in the world. It's not because of quality. It's the most pure because it's so economic, it's so cheap.
And it's the most damaging to your nervous system and your whole physiological state by far. Having said that, I love wine, mezcal. I drink wine with dinner all the time. I love the little like buzz I get from mezcal. So I'm not knocking alcohol as a drug, but it is a drug. I think it's important to classify it as that. We don't like to, because we were taught that drugs are, cocaine, heroin, crack. Those are definitely drugs, but alcohol can be as disabling on your consciousness as all those things. When people drink themselves, when you drink until you're like blackout or drunk enough to hit someone, you are so off center. Like that's the same as those other hard drugs. But
I think I read 85% of arrests involve inebriation. So yeah, you're harm to yourself and communities for sure. But I love that you also underscored that even the psychedelic side of things, do it with intention, responsibility. When I did the ayahuasca, I literally called up my doctor and I was like, hey, can you advise me on this? Can I do this? What's the dosage I can do? And he's like, I don't really know, but I do know a doctor that will. that will be able to help with this. And it was, referencing into doctors helping guide before jumping into something that, I don't know, younger me may have just been like, yeah, let's go do it.
That's the future of Western medicine, by the way, I believe, is an integration of Eastern kind of knowing of the mind and nervous system's role and the general body's health, and then integrate that with kind of indigenous ancient cultural practices of ayahuasca or 5-MeO-DMT or psilocybin, and how those things can bring such awareness and clarity to the mind that can then heal and calm your nervous system, which then can heal your physical body, can solve that chronic pain, or even, by the way, this might be kind of radical, cancer too. Like the more you can, I think, heal your nervous system, your general cellular health improves to the point where maybe cancer is a little bit less likely.
We just had a guest, Alyssa Goodman. She was just on the podcast talking about cancer at 32 and how much she thinks that her childhood and her inner narratives contributed to, I'm always sick. My mom is always telling me I'm just a sick kid, leading to 32. And now she's 64, looks like she's 37.
Amazing.
And is peak of health, better than she's ever felt. But it was through a lot of internal shifts, narrative shifts that she was talking about, and plant medicine that, most conversations with oncologists, you'd be like, what? Psychedelics have nothing to do with cancer diagnoses.
They can.
Inner dialogues have nothing to do. At least that's what they would say. Most of them, not all of them. But, dude, Bradley, well, I know we're bumping up on your generosity of time, but this conversation, just from a friend's perspective, so beautiful. The wisdom around everything we touched on, from your own experiences, that radical accountability and choosing, that's going to ring in my ears for months, if not years, of how grateful we can be for the people that hold us to crazy accountability. To the shift and the work that you've put into yourself for years and years and years, and still mentioning even the Hoffman process, revelations that it just is a never-ending journey. But for some reason, it's still surprising that you're still learning these massive revelations based on how much work I know you've intentionally put into your own development. So
I will say, though, in the spirit of falling forward and stumbling upward, I talk about the radical accountability. I talk about these things with more work to do than ever today, right? So in no way, shape, or form have I mastered anything. I am humbly learning how much more I have to do in all these fronts, but I encourage people to at least kind of tinker with discovery.
Amen. Maybe it's the same amount of work as always, but more awareness of just how much it is to become the people we want to be. Thank you, Bradley. You rock.
Thank you, James.
I appreciate it, buddy. And thank you for all of the support you've continuously given with what we're building with Magic Mind.
Thank you.
You're the man. Thank you.
Yeah, brother.
Dude, that was awesome.